Hey, welcome back to the tip calculator tutorial. The last lecture, we did the HTML and CSS. If you skipped it, that's totally okay. This section of the course is primarily about the JavaScript anyway, so it's okay if you skip the HTML and CSS. You didn't miss anything other than just a little bit of coding. You can go ahead and download the HTML and CSS to get yourself up to speed to this point, because right now we're just going to focus solely on JavaScript, making this tip calculator work properly with JavaScript. So let's get started. We're going to open up our JavaScript file, the script.js, and we're going to start making this thing work. So the first thing we need to do is hide the tip amount on load. So what I mean by that is this, we don't want that to show at first because it doesn't need to be there. It should only show up once we've calculated our bill and the tip amount. So we don't need to show that right away. So in JavaScript, you can hide that. So I'm going to say hide the tip amount on load, and all you really need to do is say document.getElementById, and we're going to select the total tip ID, and then we'll just say style.display, so a little bit of CSS here, equals none, so display none. Same deal for document.getElementById. We're going to hide each, the ID of each, style display equals none. That will get rid of the bottom part, the tip amount, the total tip section. And now the next thing we need to do, this is a very simple bit of JavaScript. We need to create a call to a function, so a function call. So what I mean by that is we need to click the button and then tell JavaScript to call a function. So let's see what that looks like. So we're going to say clicking the button calls our custom function, and we don't have the function built yet. That's what we're going to. That's what the biggest part of this JavaScript lecture is. It's about building the function. So document.getElementById. This is the button, so we're going to calculate. It's the ID of the button there. On click. This is a built-in JavaScript function here. So on click. Now we say equals function, and this is the syntax of calling a function. So function, parentheses here if you need to add a parameter, which in this case we don't. And then we're calling the custom function called calculate tip. And then it looks like so. Calculate tip, parentheses, and a semicolon. And so basically, this isn't built yet. Calculate tip is the name of the function that we're going to build. And you could call it whatever you want. You could say tip calculate or go or whatever, but this is what we're going to call it. And so this is the basic bare bones script here. So we need to hide the tip amount, and then we need to call a function. And so let's build that function. So usually you want to build functions, or I like building the functions at the top of the script and keeping them all in one place so that you can call functions at any point. And they're nicely located at the top of the script. You can have them at the bottom of the script too. It doesn't really matter. Okay, so let's go ahead and create a function. So I'm going to say custom function. And right here you say function calculate tip. Whoops, spelled that wrong. Calculate tip. And here is where we build our function. So when we click the button, it's going to call this function. And this function won't execute until it is called, and it will never execute unless something calls it. And in this case, we're actually calling when you click the button, that's when we're calling this function to perform what happens between these two curly braces. First thing we want to do is store the data of the inputs. So the inputs that will have values like the bill amount and the total number of people, service quality. This is where we want to store that data in variables. Var bill amount equals document.getElementById. We're going to select the bill amount ID, which is an input. Whoops, bill amount. Come on, Brad. There we go. Dot value. This is how you get the value in JavaScript. So this is saying store in the bill amount variable the ID of bill amount, or the value of the ID of bill amount. So it's looking for the value, literally the value within that input. So now this variable will have that data. once you click calculate tip, because at first this isn't going to happen. So once you click that button, this is when all the magic happens. This is when JavaScript checks to see what the value is of that variable or of that input. Another one, var service quality. Remember, these are custom names here. They can call them whatever you want, but I'm calling them these because it makes sense, it's easy to read, and you know what you're looking for. Document.getElementById. We're going to be selecting the service quality. And you see what I'm doing here? I made the ID of the HTML the same as the variables, just for consistency. So there's no confusion. It's just very simple. And you don't have to do that. It's not going to break if you change the ID on your HTML and then right here in your JavaScript, it's okay. You can have a different variable name too. But for me, it keeps everything consistent so I know what I'm looking for. Again, we're grabbing value here. We're going to have another one here. Var num people equals document dot get element by ID. And just to show you, we don't need to have the IDs be the same. I was just saying I made the IDs the same as the variables. You can have a different ID, and in this case, we do have a different ID. Total people is what I call the ID. Num people is what I call the variable. You can have the variable be called total people as well, as long as you use that later on down your script. Value, again. Okay, so now we have all the data of the inputs once we call the function. Next thing we need to do is do a really quick validation. So quick validation. And what I mean by that is, what about when people add 0 or nothing? What if they don't add anything and they just go ahead and click calculate? We need to be able to not perform the function and tell, hey, like you got to add stuff to this calculator because I can't do anything unless you add some numbers. That's the point of me. So this is what we're doing here. It's very simple. We're using if. There's a basic syntax. So if bill amount is equal to, so you can do 2 equal signs or 3 equal signs. The technical reason why you could use one or the other is you can read up on this, and I can add some extra resources for you to read. But basically, 2 equal signs performs a little bit of a change in the type of text that is added, and 3 equal signs is kind of a verbatim exactly what is the value. So I like to think of it as 2 equal signs. This operator says is equal to, and this operator is exactly equal to. That's kind of how I like thinking of it. And so sometimes, you could use either one. But in some cases, using 2 equal signs will get you a different value, especially if you're using numbers like 0 or none. But when you have 3 equal signs, it's going to look exactly what that value is and not going to do any changes in the type of value. And we're going to look for an empty string. So sometimes, like I said, when you use 2 equal signs, this empty string could be interpreted differently if you're using 2 or 3 equal signs. So just to be safe, I like to use 3. So if bill amount is exactly equal to an empty string, which means nothing. So if bill amount is exactly equal to nothing, which means they didn't add anything to that input. Or, that is the or operator, service quality is equal to 0. And in this case, 0 is just 0. We're not looking for an empty string. You can just use the double, or if you want, you can use the 3 equals signs. So double equal sign. So service quality is equal to 0. Okay, so in this case, if bill amount is exactly equal to an empty string or service quality is equal to 0, then window.alert, please enter some values to get this baby up and running. And there we go. Now, we need to kill the function at this point because they haven't added anything. We don't want the function to keep running to perform the calculation because they didn't add anything. So we need to stop. And you do that just by adding return, like so. Whoops, that's not how you spell return. Return. And you can also, to keep it efficient, and have return be right here, like so. So I can remove it here, and you could just say return, and then the rest of the code here, if you want to do that. Or you can just have it be on 2 separate lines. They do the same thing. So return. That returns the kind of the program out of the function, and we're not going to continue from here until they fix their mistakes. This will prevent the function from continuing. Okay, and now what we need to do is, it's kind of another little bit of a validation. So For example, if somebody were to add a number here, so say your bill is $40 and you chose, say outstanding, it's not going to work right now because we don't have this function built fully. But what if you added, if you didn't add anybody, then we need to be able to tell the program or tell the function to add or remove each at the bottom of the calculator. So when you have 4 people or more than one person, we need to say how much you tip each, rather than when you have nothing, you don't need to say each because it's just you paying. So we need to tell the function if they chose more than one person, if they've added more than one person, then add each, tack the words each or the word each at the end of the tip amount, just so you know this is how much each person should tip. So I'm going to say check to see if this input is empty or less than or equal to 1. And so if this will be num people is exactly equal to an empty string, or num people is less than or equal to 1. So this says if num people is exactly equal to nothing, so if you didn't enter anything at all, or num people is less than or equal to 1, because if you added 1, it's just one person. If you didn't add anything, it should also perform the same way. Num people is equal to 1. So I just took the variable num people and I added the value of 1. So if you added nothing, or if you added 1, or if you typed in 0, they're all the same scenario. Make sure that the variable value is equal to 1, whether you added nothing, 1, or 0. Make num people equal to 1. So I stored the value of 1 in num people. And now what I would do is inside this if statement, I need to say document.getElementById, and I'm selecting each style display is equal to none. And so this will say, this will remove or it will hide the each ID. And now we need to say at the end of this if statement else, and we'll say document.getElementById, and we're going to select each style display is equal to block. And so what this does is, let me just kind of read it out to you here. It checks to see if num people is equal to nothing or less than or equal to 1, then it's just going to keep that ID hidden because just one person has been dining, and you only need to show the one person how much they need to tip. Otherwise, more than one person is dining, and so you need to add to show the each text to say, hey, each of you need to tip. Okay, so that is that part of the function. Let's move on to the next part of the function. Now this is the kind of the bones or the meat and potatoes of the function. This is where we're actually going to do some math. We're going to say var total. So we created a variable here, var total is equal to, and this is where we're going to do some math. In parentheses, bill amount multiplied by service quality, and then divided by num people. Okay, so the reason why we wanted to do this is because in the parentheses we'll perform first. So we're just going to take the bill amount multiplied by service quality, so $100 times 20%, so for example, and then divide it by the number of people. Now the reason why we wanted to check to see if up here this input was equal to less than or equal to 1 is because if they didn't add anything, then the value of num people would be not a number. It would literally be NaN for not a number. That's how JavaScript handles that. Or if they added 0, or in that case added 0, then it's going to divide by 0. And then this is going to equal nothing. So it's going to break our tip calculator. Or if they added nothing, then it's going to say not a number. It's going to try and divide this value by NaN, which is going to break our tip calculator and say not a number. So we don't want that. We want to make sure that if you're one person, whether you typed it in or not, it's going to divide it by 1, which is not going to break our math here. Okay, and now we need to say total, because we've already established the variable. We just need to do a little bit of extra math here. We need to round the decimal place, because if we just leave it as this, it's going to divide the number. And I'll just show you. Why don't we just do it? Let's do a quick window dot alert, and we'll say total. So now check this out. How much was your bill? $40. Say 30. Calculate. So 12. So it says 12. So we don't have any decimal places. But what if we said something like 36.38? See how it says 10.914? You don't want your bill your tip to be 10.914. You would just want a simple 2 decimal places. That's how we work. So then how would we do that? So then we need to round it to 2 decimal places. So what we just need to do is say total equals math.round, and then total, that's the variable, multiplied by 100, and then divided by 100. That will round it to 2 decimal places. So we don't have 3 or 4 or so on and so forth. And what does that look like? Well, what if we said 100.5 and we chose 15%? Okay, we got 15.08, but what if this is where we present a problem. So that looks good so far, but what if we were to say $20.50 and then the service was 20%, 4.1? Well, we don't really want that. What if we wanted to say 410? Because that makes more sense. So all you need to do now is say total equals total. So again, we're taking the total variable dot 2 fixed and then 2. Whoops. Within the parentheses. So now that's just going to make sure you always have 2 decimal places. So let's see, 20.5, and then we chose, it was okay. Actually, we chose good. There we go, 410. So that solves our issue there. I'm going to go ahead and remove that window alert because now we don't really need that. We're going to finish up the function here by displaying the tip, because pretty much everything's built. So we'll go ahead and just add some comment here, display the tip, and we'll say document.getElementById, and we'll select the total tip ID, and then style.display equals block. Okay. And then we will go ahead and document.getElementById and tip inner HTML equals total. So now we're just going to display the total tip container, and then in the tip ID, just use the inner HTML to display the total, the value in total, which is stored right up here. So now if we save this and check it out, we'll add our bill. Let's say it was $85.37, and our service was outstanding, and we had 5 people. There you go, $5.12 each, or $25.61 each, or same deal there. What if we did something like 4 and we had a massive bill? We went out for a really big dinner. $42.27 each person. So there you go. That's the tip calculator in JavaScript. Feel free to go through the code and comb through it just to figure out how it works again, and maybe play around with it, and maybe you want to style it differently. Maybe you want to perform different functions altogether. And go ahead, play around and see what you can come up with. And that is the JavaScript tip calculator.